February 21st, 2026. The world is holding its breath. For decades, the phrase "war with Iran" has been the ultimate geopolitical bogeyman, a theoretical disaster that everyone feared but few believed would actually happen. But tonight, the theory is being replaced by steel, fire, and a ticking clock. In Washington, the ultimatum is clear. President Donald Trump has issued a staggering 10-day deadline to the leadership in Tehran. Accept a grand bargain that dismantles your nuclear program and halts your regional proxies, or face the consequences. In the Persian Gulf, the response is visible from space. The United States has amassed the largest concentration of air and naval power in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Over 150 advanced aircraft, 2 carrier strike groups, and a massive fleet of aerial tankers are now in position. The question is no longer if there will be a confrontation, but when. Are we witnessing the final days of a failed diplomacy, or the opening moves of a conflict that could redefine the 21st century? From the secret whitelist of targets to the smart blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the stage is set for a reckoning. This is not a drill. This is the brink, the arsenal of coercion. To understand how close we are to the edge, you have to look at the sheer scale of the military mobilization. This isn't a routine rotation of forces. This is a maximum pressure campaign that has moved from the economic realm to the kinetic one. Central to this buildup is the arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln. Together, these floating fortresses carry more combat power than most medium-sized nations. But it's not just about the carriers. Intelligence reports indicate that at least 108 aerial refueling tankers have been deployed to the CENTCOM theater. Why tankers? Because tankers allow F-35s and B-2 Spirits to strike deep into the Iranian heartland, targets like the Fordo enrichment plant and the underground missile silos of the IRGC, and return safely without ever landing in a host nation. This is a strategic workaround. America's allies in the Gulf, nations like Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, are terrified. They host the bases, but they don't want to host the war. They know that if the first Tomahawk missile flies from their soil, the Iranian retaliation will land on their oil terminals and desalination plants. By saturating the region with tankers and fifth-generation stealth fighters, the US is signaling that it can fight this war from the sea and the sky, bypassing the political hesitations of its regional partners. The Midnight Hammer precedent. Why does the Trump administration believe this will work? Because they've done it before. In June 2025, a combined US and Israeli operation codenamed Midnight Hammer delivered a devastating blow to Iran's nuclear infrastructure. For 12 days, precision strikes rained down on Isfahan and Natanz. At the time, the world thought war had finally begun. But the 2025 strikes were different. They were targeted. They were surgical. And perhaps most importantly, the Iranian regime chose to take the hit rather than risk a full-scale collapse. They launched a symbolic retaliatory strike on a US base in Qatar that caused 0 casualties, allowing both sides to step back from the ledge. However, the 2026 crisis is not a repeat of 2025. The June strikes degraded Iran's nuclear capabilities, but they didn't obliterate them. Reports now suggest that Iran has used the last 8 months to move its most sensitive enrichment activities even deeper underground, into mountains that can resist even the heaviest bunker-buster munitions. Washington has concluded that surgical is no longer enough. The rhetoric has shifted from nuclear containment to regime behavior change. And when you talk about changing the behavior of a revolutionary regime, you aren't talking about a 12-day operation. You're talking about a weeks-long campaign of decapitation. The internal collapse. While the US prepares from the outside, Iran is rotting from the within. The January 2026 protests were the most violent in the history of the Islamic Republic. Triggered by a total currency collapse and a hyperinflation rate that turned the rial into scrap paper, thousands of Iranians took to the streets. The regime's response was a brutal, smart blackout. They cut the internet and deployed the Basiji militia to suppress the crowds with live ammunition. Thousands were killed. But this time, the fear didn't work. The protests moved from the cities to the oil fields. For US planners, this internal fragility is the X factor. There is a growing belief in the White House that the Iranian leadership is more afraid of its own people than it is of American F-22s. The current military buildup is designed to act as a giant megaphone for those protesters, to show the Iranian people that the invincible IRGC cannot even defend its own airspace. The hope is that a series of sustained strikes will trigger a total collapse of the security apparatus, leading to a domestic revolution. It is a high-stakes gamble that assumes the Iranian people will see the US as a liberator rather than an invader. But as history in Iraq and Libya has shown, that is a gamble that rarely pays off. The stratagem of the Strait. Iran knows it cannot win a conventional dogfight with the United States. It cannot outproduce the US Navy. But it holds one card that can bring the global economy to its knees: the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this narrow waterway. In February 2026, the IRGC Navy conducted smart control drills. This isn't the old-school plan of mining the entire strait and shutting it down, which would hurt Iran's own exports to China. Instead, they are practicing a Houthi-style selective blockade. Using high-speed suicide boats and shore-based anti-ship missiles, the IRGC plans to target Western-linked tankers while allowing Chinese and Russian vessels to pass freely. If they can spike the price of oil to $150 or $200 a barrel, they believe they can trigger a global recession that will force the US public to demand an end to the war. Already, oil markets are pricing in a war premium. Brent crude has surged past $70 and gold is edging toward record highs. Iran's strategy is simple: make the war more expensive for the Americans than it is for the mullahs. The decapitation option. The most terrifying aspect of the 2026 buildup is the change in the US target list. Intelligence leaks suggest that the Pentagon has moved beyond bombing factories. They are now looking at targeted individuals. After the success of Israeli strikes against senior IRGC commanders during the 12-day war last year, US officials are reportedly considering a decapitation strategy. This would involve using stealth drones and loitering munitions to eliminate the top tier of the Iranian military and political leadership in the first hours of a conflict. The goal would be to leave the Iranian military headless, unable to coordinate a retaliatory strike or a blockade of the strait. But this strategy carries a massive risk of the Hydra effect. If you kill the supreme leader or the head of the IRGC, do you get a more moderate successor? Or do you get a chaotic explosion of radicalized cells who have nothing left to lose? Many regional experts warn that decapitating the Iranian state would create a vacuum that would make the collapse of Syria look like a minor disturbance. It would trigger a refugee crisis that would overwhelm the UAE and Saudi Arabia and potentially turn the Middle East into a patchwork of warring militias armed with remnants of Iran's advanced weaponry. Conclusion: the March 3rd deadline. The clock is ticking toward the end of February. The Geneva talks have reached an impasse. The Board of Peace diplomatic staff is reportedly preparing to evacuate Tehran. The 10-day ultimatum expires between February 28th and March 3rd. We are currently in the grey zone, that tense silent period where the diplomats have stopped talking and the generals have taken over the maps. The US says it doesn't want war, only a better deal. Iran says it won't be bullied by coercive diplomacy. But when you move 2 carrier groups and 100 tankers into a small pond, the margin for error disappears. One nervous pilot, one misidentified radar blip, or one over-eager IRGC commander could be the spark that ignites the powder keg. Is the US close to war with Iran? The hardware is in place. The rhetoric is at a fever pitch. The internal pressure in Tehran is peaking. If the March 3rd deadline passes without a signed framework, the grand bargain will be replaced by the grand conflict. The world has seen this movie before, but the 2026 version has higher stakes, deadlier tech, and a much more uncertain ending. What do you think? Is President Trump's maximum pressure the only way to stop a nuclear Iran, or are we walking blindly into a catastrophe that will haunt us for generations? Let us know in the comments. This is a conversation that affects every one of us, from the price of the gas in your car to the security of the global order. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to stay updated as this crisis unfolds. We will be tracking the movement of the carrier groups and the results of the Geneva impasse daily. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon. This is The Front Line. Thanks for watching. Stay informed. Stay safe.